Today I have a very serious question from my entire audience, and I want you to leave me the best answer you possibly can and be straight up honest with me because I'm going to be honest with y'all. And the question is, what new gun law could be put in place that would have stopped the Butler shooter, the Georgia school shooter, or the would-be assassin at Trump International? I'm going to talk about each one of these three shooters, how they obtained the gun, and also some differentiating circumstances and some unique circumstances around each one, revolving again around the gun used, and tell you exactly what new gun law or gun laws could be put into place that would actually stop them. Now, having a gun channel, this is a pretty touchy subject, so I'm going to leave you my straight up opinion. I want to hear yours after the video. No matter if you agree or disagree, let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. Let's go and get into it. To refer to these guys as just the shooter or would-be assassin, for obvious reasons, I think copycats exist. Sometimes I've had to show a picture here or there or even said the name, but trust me, I try to keep that stuff out of these videos as much as possible. So anyways, the Butler shooter, right? Where did he get this gun? Well, we know this is a very basic AR setup. First of all, he's got a Holosun Amos on top, which is just a non-magnified red dot DPMS rifle. Nothing special to it at all. But at 150 yards, you don't really need a special rifle for most people with very little practice to make that shot. And we know that he went to the range dozens of times leading up, the year leading up to when he tried to assassinate President Trump. So he was more than capable, from what we know, of taking that shot. Fortunately, there was a guy on the ground that took a shot, broke the stock on his rifle, and threw him off enough to throw that shot off just a millimeter. And of course, Trump turned his head as well, which we were a millimeter from serious national tragedy in this country on a scale nobody's ever seen. But how did he get the gun, right? What gun law or new gun law could have stopped this? Well, his dad bought the gun legally in 2013. He transferred it to his son legally as well. Now, in most states, including Pennsylvania, you have to be 18 to buy a long gun, 21 to buy a handgun. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Some states, California, Florida, a handful of them have actually upped the age to buy a long gun to 21. Every new law was followed, right? Now, most 18-year-olds do not have it in their minds that they're going to assassinate a former and future would-be or potential president as well, and bring an frickin' national tragedy on a level you've never seen to our country. Most 18-year-olds are thinking, or he was 20, but most 18 to 20-year-olds or 18 to 21-year-olds or whatever are thinking about college, starting their future, whatever. They're not thinking in this way. So of course, these guys that we're talking about are exceptions to the rule. Now you may say, oh, well, if we raise the age to 21, he was 20, he wouldn't have been able to do this. Well, just like his dad was able to transfer him the rifle, in a lot of states, even though you have to be 21 to buy a handgun, as long as you are able to possess a gun, a relative can transfer a handgun to you when you're still under that age. And even if they were to raise it to 21, this exception would probably still be there if you have a family member or if it's a temporary loan. Those are treated differently in a lot of states too. Now, of course, you gotta know the laws in your state. I'm just talking in generalities here, but that's typically what it is. So you do a temporary loan to somebody with a firearm and they go and do something tragic like this. There's nothing you can do to really stop that. So the age limit that's already in place, even if it was upped, wouldn't have stopped this. Plus, we got to think about how many rifles are out there. So even though he wouldn't be able to buy a long gun at 21 from, let's say, a FFL, there is a potential that he could have bought it illegally if the age was raised. But remember, we're talking in, what ifs at this point. The shooter at Butler was 20 years old. At 18, he could walk into an FFL. He had no prior criminal history. He would have been able to walk in and buy that rifle, no problem. So what about any new gun laws that actually would stop him? Well, I'm going to cover all three of those at the end, but I promise you we'll get there. Let's just talk about these two other guys. Georgia school shooter, right? Now, he is underage, right? So he cannot legally buy a firearm of any kind. Now, him and his dad went on these shooting trips. One of the things that first brought my attention to this shooting specifically is the FBI already got a tip from somebody on Discord. So there's a 500 million users on Discord. They narrowed it down to his email, right? So local police went and questioned him. And of course, he denied the whole thing. And there's no more follow-up that can be done at this point. They asked the dad, hey, do you have guns? He's like, yeah, I got guns. Are they accessible to your son? Yes, but none of them are loaded. Now, after hearing this type of credible threat, because in my mind as a parent, if I have a kid that's going through something, the home life, his home life obviously, wasn't the best, but either way, if my kid's being investigated for this type of threat, a threat to his middle school that he's currently going to, and they narrow my kid down out of all these users, I'm thinking even at that point, he's probably the one that made those threats. And again, at that point, I'm going to take it upon myself as a responsible parent and just say, hey, we're locking up all the guns for everybody's safety. Instead, his dad does the opposite just 7 months after that investigation and buys his son an AR for Christmas. Now, buying a kid a gun on Christmas is one of those traditions that we've had for a very long time in this country, and I don't think it should ever stop. I think it's a wonderful thing to pass this on to the generation below you, right? And teach them about guns and safety and all that kind of stuff. But first of all, you got to know your kid. If he was just investigated for a very serious threat, buying him a gun, probably not the best move. And let's just be honest, most of us that did have guns that were bought for us as kids, we didn't have those type of threats or thoughts, right? And they were certainly locked away from us unless we were going on a hunting or shooting trip or any number of things. Again, this falls solely on the dad. Of course, his son shares responsibility, but the dad really didn't do his son any favors, that's for sure. I would have been trying to get answers for my son. What's going on with him? How can we make this better? And certainly keep the guns locked up away from him. I don't believe the government should be able to come in and tell you, hey, you got to keep your guns locked up, because now you're restricting access to people. You're telling them what they have to do when we can make our own decisions about what's best for our family. But obviously, this guy was unable to do that. Now, every school, basically, every K through 12 school in America essentially has a no guns policy. Now, there are some exceptions to this on campuses where some kids can, of course, carry firearms for their own personal protection. But any elementary, middle, high school, typically the only people that have guns are resource officers, or if cops come in to talk to kids, those are the kind of situations where the only situations really where guns are permitted. So what gun law in the books could stop this? Because clearly the school is a gun-free zone. Well, unfortunately, criminals don't care about a sign you place out front. As a matter of fact, when they see a gun-free zone, just like if they see a ADT sign out front, they know, there's resistance. But if your neighbor doesn't have such signs and there's no cameras, well, then they know, soft target. And that's what these cowards look for. They don't want to be shot back at. So gun-free zones don't work. And obviously, this kid that's underage had access to a firearm when he should have never had access to that gun. So bad parenting and a gun-free zone. I don't know if there's a lot we can do there, but I'm certainly going to tell you if there's a gun law, a new gun law that could stop this. And lastly, let's look at the Trump international shooter, if you will, the would-be assassin. In between his love affair with Ukraine and writing love letters to Zelensky, whatever he was doing in his spare time, this is a career criminal. 100 interactions with police from 1980 to 2010. A standoff with police in, I forget the year that was, but he had a standoff with police. He was pulled over. He went to his office. By the way, the guy's from like North Carolina. He moved to Hawaii, but he goes to his office. He's got a long gun, right? And he barricades himself inside there for a few hours. Drug charges and all kinds of moving violations. This guy should have never had a freaking license ever again. And he was also a convicted felon. Now, there's already a law in the books for this too. If you're a convicted felon, you can't own any type of firearm or ammunition. This guy has an SKS with modern Tapco stock or some kind of conversion on it to make it look like an AK, but it's an SKS. This is an older type of rifle. It uses basically World War II technology and was quickly replaced after World War II with the traditional AK. Either way, this guy can't be in possession of a freaking cap gun, much less a real gun. By the way, I used to love those cap guns as kids too. We just grew up with stuff like this. I don't even know if they make cap guns. Let me know down below if they still make those things. But the smell from the paper and the little, little powder explosion, whatever the heck it wasn't dangerous by any means. But, it made the little pop and, anyways, I still remember that smell. Regardless, this guy can't be in possession of any of it. And yet he's got an SKS and it's got a ground off serial number. Now that too is already on the books. You cannot ground off a serial number on a firearm. So every firearm has a serial number, so they can trace that back down the line, right, down the rabbit hole, to be able to find out who actually was the last person that bought that gun. But wherever he bought this gun, obviously it was on the black market, or he was able to get it transferred. Maybe there was some kind of straw purchase done. We don't know the circumstances about how he got the gun. All we know is at some point either he ground off the serial number or it was ground off when he bought it on the black market. Now, of course, selling guns on the black market too is something that is already a law on the books. It's already illegal to do that. So each one of these people, each one of these cowards broke a gun law, right? They all did it. And yet we have all of these gun laws already on the books. So what does that mean? Well, they obviously didn't care about the law. While 95 to 98% of people that do own firearms care about the law, right? They're some of the most responsible people on the planet because they know we're held at a higher standard because we are gun owners or concealed carriers. Gun owners on any level, you will see us pretty much following the law, the vast majority of us, but these guys obviously didn't care. So what new gun law could have stopped this? Maybe a red flag law in the case of the Georgia school shooter. Well, no, because even red flag laws, even if Georgia had that, there is a time period in which those guns are held from you, right? So if they deem you a threat, or a relative, or an ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, deems you as a threat to yourself or others, they come in, they take the guns. Once you prove you can have those guns again, you're being a good boy or girl, well, now you can have your property back. Well, that's pretty dangerous, first of all, because you're taking people's property without due process and without them having already committed a crime. You're just assuming they're going to. What if I have an ex-wife or an ex-girlfriend or ex-lover of any kind, right? And they get really pissed off of me and they say, hey, he threatened me with a gun. You should go in and take his guns. Well, if a judge deems this as credible, that is very well what could happen. A red flag law wouldn't necessarily work because in the case of the Georgia school shooter, let's say they did take his guns. Let's say it was 6 months or a year he got them back. Well, he committed the crime, 14 months later? If somebody has intention to do something evil, you can't necessarily always stop it in its tracks. A lot of the times we see with these school shootings that you can, but that's not always the case. So in my opinion, there is no new gun law that would stop any of these. But there is something that could stop or could have stopped all. First of all, not talking about a political opponent like they are the second coming of Hitler in the case of two of these guys who were obviously indoctrinated to the point where they believed that Trump was such a threat they would risk their lives and go to such a crazy extent to kill the former president. Now realizing this guy's been in office for 4 years, he didn't do any of the stuff that a lot of the people on the other side of the aisle like to say he's going to do. But specifically when it comes to guns, in the case of the Georgia school shooter, not everybody should be parents, but also there was warning signs, right? We know that the mom contacted the school 30 minutes prior. When that counselor, whoever took the call, again, I understand this is a tough situation, the mom, when that counselor took that call, locked down the school. right then and there. Get everybody in classrooms, make sure doors are locked. They had some good procedures in place with the ID tags and having, quick response of the resource officers that were, of course, armed, but also having the ID badges. They could quickly press them. Police were on the way. They knew there was an emergency. All the computer screens had, warning, lockdown in place. But the counselor at that point, she knew that her son, the lady that called in, she knew her son had already been talking about a school shooting early that morning. And then her mom calls and says, I need you to check on him. We got an emergency here. So why she didn't lock it down, we don't know. But not everybody should be parents. Let's just be honest with you. But raising your kids, typically raising them, if they are of sound mind, raising them how to respect, learn how to operate firearms, and all of that kind of stuff is a fantastic thing. And just gun education in general is a good thing if you can teach people when they're young how dangerous firearms can be and how to use them properly and all of that kind of stuff. But also making sure that we get rid of soft targets, making sure that teachers that want to go through the process can carry at schools. This has been implemented in some areas, but we need more of that. The same teachers we expect to protect the kids with their bodies as shields, we could give them a real shield, a firearm, and actually allow them to deter a lot of this and make it known. Hey, this school is not a gun-free zone. Some of the teachers here are absolutely armed, and you'll never know which ones. And that will kind of put it in maybe a kid's head like, I don't really want to do this. I don't want the resistance. But making sure that we have the ability to get good police officers and resources, making sure these guys are trained well for these situations and that they're not going to hang out in a hallway when tragedies are happening, making sure that we can get there quickly to them and that response can be as quick as possible. Unfortunately, you cannot stop every single crime out there, but there are a lot of things that we could be doing, including some of the things I talked about, to deter a lot of this crime going forward. And people, good people with firearms, I don't care what the media says, they absolutely can deter a lot of this crime. Unfortunately, you don't hear about all the good people in the United States that save themselves with firearms every year. You only hear about the soft targets and the people that are the victims of criminals with guns, not the people that refuse to become victims. You'll never hear about those stories, but they absolutely, tens, hundreds of thousands, some even say millions of times a year, citizens are able to protect themselves with guns. And we can do the same in schools. And obviously, keeping the president safe and all of that. I've talked about that extensively with Secret Service and all that. But there's no new gun law that I see that could actually stop any of these stuff because they're already willing to break the laws we have in place. A new one just means they skip over one more. And remember that in a lot of these cases, the perpetrators expect they're not going to make it out of that situation like what happened in Butler, so they don't care about facing the music on one more additional charge. What the hell does that mean to them? So there you go, man. It's more of a culture shift in getting guns in the hands of good people and keeping them out of the hands of bad. Unfortunately, though, you cannot stop everything, but we can deter it. So there you go, man. That's my opinion, and I want to hear yours. No matter if you agree or disagree, let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one, and as always, hold them down.